Hello. What is up, neurodivs and neurotips? That means neurodivergence and neurotypicals. What is up, how it do, what it does, amongst other various greetings. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to the live stream where, yes, we go, and we certainly go best. We are going to be discussing today on little lecture live streams autism and the church, which I've got a little bit of. I'm ready to learn about weaponized autism. That's the spirit. Let's go. I've got a little bit of an investment in this conversation. A lot of my friends. I have a lot of friends on the spectrum. Like one of my best friends. He's not just French, poor him, but he's also got autism. So dual conditions. What can you do about that? As well as if you've seen the discussion that I hosted between me and Ethan Cathro, if you go into my live stream videos, it was a discussion on the universalism. He's a universalist. He's also got autism. He's very vocal about that. He's a friend of mine, and I've got a bunch of other friends as well as some very close pals who are recently diagnosed. So good for them. So I have an investment in this conversation, and I look forward to watching this lecture with you. It's probably the only lecture aside from the anti-right one that we did last time that I have watched before doing a live stream. So that's cool and quirky. We'll start at 5 minutes. We'll hit the play button once we've hit 5 minutes. Until then, we can just I don't know, chat to each other, maybe wink and do kissy faces. Valentine's Day was yesterday. That's really cool. TikTok time to rock is the very neurodivergent in a different way, David Wood would say. Very neurodivergent in a different way, you're right with it. TikTok time to rock. I'm gonna drink some water. Cheers. You should get some water for yourself as well. We've got 2 more minutes until the actual lecture starts. So if you know how the lecture live stream goes, I recommend you get a little notebook or paper or whatever, but I would recommend a notebook because it's just better. You know, when you write notes on just a blank sheet of paper, you throw it out. It takes up space. It's clunky and you don't like it. But a notebook, a very different conversation. Very different conversation. I recommend you grab yourself a notebook or whatever and write down your notes on the lecture as we go. I'm going to be doing exactly that. Will there be trains in this presentation? No, I'm sorry. If that's your special interest, I apologize. I'm not going to be touching a train. Although trains are one of my special interests. I know a little bit about trains myself. Very efficient mode of transport. Very efficient. All right, here's a page. Free page. Good stuff. Another autism joke. Very, very good. All right, kids. 1 more minute and we're starting a wee lecture. How was your day? How was your day, kids? All of you? Mine was okay. I went to a little coffee shop today. Ate made potatoes and sausage. That was my lunch. And I just ate some ramen 10 minutes ago. I'm pushing buttons at work. What do you do for work? And are you allowed to be watching a little live stream while you're on work? The answer's probably no, but who cares? Just don't get caught. Or whatever. Okay. It's been 5 minutes. Well, it's been fun babysitting, but tool grinding, and yes, wow. That's very cool. I don't know what any of that means. Swimming in deadlines today, sweet potato bacon. Swimming in deadlines today, sweet potato, bacon, and fried onions for tea. It's not too bad at all. Not too bad at all. I'm not a big fan of bacon, but everything else sounds pretty good. All right, enough babysitting. Let's get to work. So we're going to be listening to a Scottish man, and yeah, it's pretty good. That's cool. A Scottish man talk about autism. So, let's get this into position. As I say, I have in fact already watched this live stream, so I know how it goes. It's not a bad live stream, lecture. Sorry. So how it's going to go is the first half of his lecture, he's going to be telling us all about autism. He's going to be telling us all about it, as well as misconceptions, developments in our understanding of it, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. That's going to be the first 30 minutes. And then the next 30 minutes is going to be his ecclesiology, his ecclesiological approach to autism. So the first half is discussing autism. The second half is discussing the ecclesiology. So expect that for this live stream. We're going to be learning a lot about what autism is, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. You will see as we go. Goes into lurk mode. Correct. I am going to go into lurk mode, and so will you. Let's enjoy.
By saying a few words about our title, and then I'll say a little bit about what I'm going to do over the next hour or so. The title, Engaging Autism, Honoring God, was suggested by Thomas. And I like it a lot because I think it captures the tension between two different ways of thinking about autism in the church. One is a way that I want to endorse, the other is a way that I don't. One way of thinking about autism in the church is to think that our engagement with it is the kind of engagement we have with a problem. So where one of the overtones of engaging is that we engage with something that's a problem that we need to tackle, that we need to deal with. And that's the way that a lot of Christians think about autism and the church, that it's something problematic. And that's not the way that I want to think about it tonight. The way that I want to think about it, and as you'll see hopefully in the course of this lecture, is rather that we engage autism in the same way that we engage every part of our body, whether we think about it or not, whether we recognize it or not, every moment of our existence. Some of those parts of our bodies we don't think about much. Some of those parts of our bodies are messy, are hidden away, but we rely upon them. So even at this very moment, you're engaging parts of your physiology, parts of your anatomy that you couldn't even name. Parts of your liver are supporting your existence right now. And few of us probably gave any thought to that at the beginning of this hour.
I didn't.
So when we're thinking about engaging autism, we're thinking about engaging intentionally and mindfully a part of the body that we often overlook. And of course, I'm using that language in relation to one of the core biblical images for the church, which is that the church is the body of Christ. And that persons with autism, autistic people who are part of the church, are members of the body of Christ, united to Christ himself. So that's a quick comment on our title. Let me also say a couple of other things. First of all, my own interest in this has grown over many years, and I want to just stress from the outset that it's not an entirely academic interest. So I have various kinds of personal investment and personal experience of this. I'm not going to go into detail in that here.
I'm just gonna speed him up because he's talking too slow for my liking. Let's go to not subtitles, friggin' hell. Let's go to 1.25. Let's see how it goes there.
Partly because I think there are too many people that I need to get permission from to give you some of that detail. But I stress it because I think there's a genuine and a genuinely justified concern within the autistic community about the way that autism...
Sorry. It's just this second I turn on, he's talking too fast, but then it goes to like a reasonable... You know what? It's an hour. It's fine.
Is often represented by people who themselves are not actually autistic, and who often...
It's buffering. Stupid.
And over the whole world rose a crowd of hysterical joy.
Oh yes, ads. Of course. Advertise, watching other people's ads throughout this, and it's gonna buffer like hell. Oh God.
Deal with autism.
Right. Try that again.
Genuine and a genuinely justified concern. Deal with autism as if about the way that autism is often represented by people who themselves are not actually autistic, and who often deal with autism as if it's simply something to experiment in, something to study objectively, and without taking seriously the real identity and the real personhood of the people in question. So I want to just stress that my own engagement with this is not from afar. It's not a purely academic interest. It's a personal one, and it comes from very real experience.
Good stuff.
The last thing I think that I want to say before we really get into this is that we have about an hour to tackle a massive topic, which means that we're not going to tackle a massive topic.
Oh, yes.
We're going to tackle a few issues within this massive topic. There's going to be all kinds of questions that are begged and not addressed, and you'll just have to deal with that with what I hope is a spirit of generosity. I should say a fourth thing, which is that I have something of a cold, and I also have a thick Scottish accent, and that may make things difficult for some of you here, but hopefully we can work through all of that together.
Not going to be difficult for me.
So let me begin tonight by giving a little bit of an overview of current thinking about autism, and particularly looking at some of the ways in which autism is represented within medical and clinical literature. Once we've done that, I'm going to look at a little bit about what it means to think biblically about autism, before then focusing on some particularly relevant, as I see it, biblical material. So let me begin then by talking a little bit about what we now understand to be the case with autism. Serious research into autism began in the 20s and 30s in Germany and then subsequently in America. And two of the figures who were most important in the early stages of autism are also two of the figures who have left us with something of a problematic legacy about the way that we think about autism. So Leo Kanner is the first of those. Kanner was the person who really, more than anyone else, dominated the landscape of autism research in its early stages. Kanner studied a particularly serious form of autism, which he considered to be, if you like, a point condition, where it was marked by a fairly stable set of characteristics, which importantly was vanishingly rare. So he studied a small number of children who very unusually seemed to present a particularly severe set of characteristics. And what he perceived in them was that they were effectively locked in to their own world. They didn't appear to interact with others in a normal, what he considered to be a normal social way. And they seemed very concerned with doing the same things over and over again in the same way. That was what gave birth to the early perceptions of autism. In fact, in its early days, autism was sometimes referred to as Kanner's syndrome because of his work on it. And that gave rise also to a legacy of generations of thinking about autism as a particular severe condition that was vanishingly rare. Perhaps 1 in 10,000 people would suffer from autism, and that was the kind of language he used. He also,
which we'll discover later on in the lecture, 1 in 10,000 is massively understating how many people actually do have this condition. Condition, for the lack of better language. He'll use the word disability. I don't like using that word, but for some people it is relevant. It's a person-by-person preference, almost, in which word you want to use.
Coincidentally considered it to be a psychogenic condition, to be something that arose from bad relationships between parent and child, and particularly bad maternal relationships. Now, around about the same time that Kanner was working, and Kanner moved to America and published much of his work in English, which is one of the reasons he was so influential. But around the same time that Kanner was developing his research, Hans Asperger was also developing research onto similar kinds of phenomena in children in Germany. Asperger's work was more focused on the less severe, less extreme characteristics, and for various reasons wasn't particularly widely publicized and wasn't particularly influential until much, much later. So it's from Hans Asperger that we get the name Asperger's syndrome, which really principally in the 80s and onwards began to be used of a less severe form of autism, which was also increasingly perceived to be more common.
That's fair.
And Asperger's syndrome became a more common diagnosis, and for many people became a much more positive diagnosis, where classical autism, as it was often referred to, was seen as a severe condition. Asperger's syndrome was seen to be less severe and often perhaps seen to be more empowering. So autistic people themselves would often identify themselves not just as having Asperger's syndrome, but they would speak about themselves as being Aspie, and that's the language that they would use. Now, one of the difficult details in this whole story is that more recently, literally within the last 2 or 3 years, Asperger's involvement in basically in the Third Reich in Nazi Germany has increasingly come to the fore in scholarship on Asperger himself.
Good stuff.
And that's led to all kinds of re-evaluation. For a long time, Asperger was effectively regarded as a hero for autism research. That's no longer quite the case. But his work, nevertheless, has been enormously influential. As I mentioned a moment ago, Kanner's work really dominated the landscape of autism studies for a long time. And it was really only in the early 80s that people began to pick up on Asperger's work and began to speak about autism, not as something that presented only in, if you like, a punctiliar point fashion in a very serious form, but as something that might better be spoken of as a spectrum. Lorna Wing, a British medical practitioner, she was one of the leading people to pick up on Asperger's work and to begin serious research into what would go on to be described as Asperger's syndrome. And within the actual research community, Lorna Wing was enormously influential. More popularly, Temple Grandin, a person who herself is autistic, who herself would identify as having Asperger's syndrome, who is actually a brilliant scientist in her own right. Temple Grandin is an animal husbandry specialist and really revolutionized some of the work in animal husbandry throughout the 20th century. And as someone with autism, became an important advocate for understanding autism from the inside. Taken together, Lorna Wing's work and the various people who ended up working with Lorna Wing and also Temple Grandin's work became very important for changing the landscape of autism studies, and particularly changing the landscape towards speaking of autism as a spectrum. Now, one of the really important things to say about autism as a spectrum is that we need not to think about it as a linear spectrum.
I'm going to pause him there to just make a little clarifying point. As for the live stream, because the first 30 minutes is just like kind of teaching us about like autism, the history of it, the misconceptions, blah blah blah. Because that isn't theological, I'm probably not going to have that much commentary to offer, and probably not that much like critical engagement to offer, because that's what the field of psychology, medical. I don't know. I don't know what field this would technically be engaging in, but it's not mine. So I'm going to have very little commentary to offer, or very little like critical engagement to offer until the second half where he starts talking ecclesiology. That's when I think we'll be able to engage more, especially theologically. So just so you know, that's probably what you can expect. But I mean, if we can engage with it until then, like, certainly try our best, and like, what else?
One of the dangers is that when people hear the language of the autism spectrum, they think of something that's effectively a progressive line from black to white with shades of gray in between. And
you know that meme where it's this, I suppose, autistic girl who says almost the same thing, where some people think that autism is like just just like a line or whatever. I don't know what she actually says. And then she just whips from below the camera out a friggin' like a wheel of stats. Like it could be up here and here and here. JoJo stats. Then someone else like edited their little input into the video and was like, "Autism noise JoJo stats." Like, it's not funny talking about it in like this, but if you liked the if you saw the meme, like it was a good meme. I liked it. JoJo stats.
where you can plot people on that
the meme.
spectrum
I'll try and find
and
it.
categorize them as somewhere between high autism community itself is widely considered both problematic and offensive. It's important to recognize that actually autism really needs to be thought of as, if you like, a three-dimensional spectrum, where you have a range of symptoms that move from some things over here to some things over here, but also that move in other directions. So that effectively what you're thinking of is almost as a globe. And when you're thinking about any autistic individual, you're positioning them somewhere on that globe according to which of the characteristics they themselves may manifest and in which particular ways. So one of the expressions that's commonly used in autism studies, almost to the point of being a cliche, is if you've met one person with autism, you've met one. The difference is what you must never do is assume that you can transfer the experience of one person or the characteristics of one person or the needs of one person onto that of another person with autism. Because while there might be elements that they have in common, there will also be multiple things that are simply completely different.
One sec, I'm gonna totally like take us off track. There we go. Is that right? There we go. Ah, there we go.
The autism spectrum looks more like this. The spectrum refers.
Yeah.
In reality, the autism spectrum looks more like
That's
this.
one of the versions of
The
the meme.
spectrum refers.
Anyway, let's get back. Let's get back to the subject matter. Autism.
Autism needs to be approached on a person-by-person basis, where effectively what you're doing is locating them somewhere characteristics and taking their individual personhood seriously. Effectively what you're doing is locating them somewhere within this three-dimensional globe of characteristics and taking. Autism is multidimensional and is specific to the person. Now, we could work through a long list of the characteristics of autism, and to be honest, we would be here all night doing that. I find it personally helpful to think about autism as under three headings that cluster certain characteristics together. Now, actually, these clusters overlap in all kinds of ways. And all that we're going to be able to do here is to really just scratch the surface of some of the presentation.
Okay, so I know that big boy Grant here was on like, autism is more like a globe, not really a linear line. So it's three-dimensional. And that's cool, but I actually really liked the autism stats. I find that helpful, that model of thinking about how it functions. So like that girl in the colorful like shirt just whipping out the friggin' autism stats off camera. I actually find that really helpful as a way of thinking about it. And he's gonna refer to it as a globe, kinda. And good for Grant. He's the academic, not the funny colored shirt lady. Joseph and his technicolored autism shirt. But I liked the stats. I think the stats are helpful. But I really just wanted to pause the video to make that point. I find the stats helpful. Skill points.
But I find it helpful to think about autism under these three clusters of social and communicative differences, systematizing differences, and sensory differences. And I'm using the language of difference clusters of social and communicative differences, systematizing differences, and sensory differences. And I'm using the language of difference deliberately here because what characterizes autism is that effectively social and sensory information is processed by the person in a way that's different from other people. It's not necessarily worse, but it's different. And we need to accommodate those differences. So first of all, the thing that most people are aware of are the social and communicative differences of autistic people. Autistic people don't necessarily process social interaction in the way that other people do. They can appear to be somewhat awkward. They can find those interactions difficult. They can misunderstand sometimes the kind of language that people use to them. And they can fail, it seems to others, to pick up on what everyone else would take to be simply a natural kind of nonverbal communication, particularly through body language or gestures. That can range from the person who just doesn't quite seem normal to other people. And I'm going to use the word normal a few times this evening. And for the purposes of the rest of this lecture, please put it into scare quotes every time I use it. Normality, within disability studies, we often talk about the tyranny of normality or the tyranny of normalcy, where we see things and label things as normal, and everything else we categorize in our mind as abnormal or bad.
That's why I don't use, so when I talk about like stuff like this, any kind of neuro stuff, I don't use the word normal, I use the word typical. So like why I introduced the video with, hey, what up, neurotips and neurodivs, neurotypical, neurodivergent. Because normal, I have been told, can be quite alienating. Whereas typical, well, the common amount of people, it makes for common experience, common, typical, etc., rather than normal. Typical, totally fine, because it's common. Whereas normal, well, that's alienating. Makes you look like the weirdo rather than just as, whatever Grant stated, rather than you're the weirdo, you're the friggin' outcast, or you're the sore thumb. Rather, it's just different. It's not unnormal, it's just different. Or not typical, which is a far more inclusive language, and the inclusive language is important as it's not alienating, etc., etc. Yeah, Gartham stating common or typical. Yup, I concur. Let's continue. I just wanted to make that little point because he's gonna. I like that he stated. What did he say?
Where we see things and label things as normal.
Okay, I'm not going to go that far back, but basically just like putting air quotes on anytime he says normal. I would prefer if he just said typical, but he is giving the extra emphasis that I am not meaning this kind of alienating language. That's why you need to put the scare quotes on it. Okay, fine. I'll give you that. Although, like the next video after I finished watching this lecture, like the next video after that was about it was some like sermon or whatever about making a more autism-friendly church. And like at some point, the woman who was like opening the sermon just whipped out that word normal. And unlike Garth, no, not Garth, Grant. Unlike the Scotsman, rather than providing the extra clarification on what he means, and also acknowledging that this language isn't great. This lady in the sermon really whipped out that word normal and kind of almost, I don't know, it was nonchalant and kind of just kind of cringe. Yeah, it was cringe. There we go. It was cringe. To being cringe. I would know. Anyway.
And everything else we categorize in our mind as abnormal or bad. Often what we're dealing with, typicality. So autistic, often what we're dealing with are differences, atypicality, upon what for other people seems to be normal, and that can compromise or can appear to compromise their social interaction.
Yeah, you're right, Gartham. I imagine she probably meant well, but it fell flat. And like these things happen. Obviously, there's fucking bastard, you. Sorry, sorry, the incense fell onto my arm, which happens, I guess. Yeah, probably meant well, but fell flat. It happens. Apologies for the language. Just got very burned, dude.
I am a primary care physician. I'm frustrated, and
Yippee. I love advertising. Thank you. Come on, let's. My internet box was a potato. Come on.
That can range from the person who's just slightly eccentric in the eyes of others, through to the person who is profoundly affected by the condition, who is nonverbal and may really require lifelong care. The second cluster of differences is that autistic people are often quite drawn to systems. They like systems. They like things that are systematic and will often be attracted to these for personal interests. But also they like to impose systems on things. They may like to do things systematically. If you remember, when I began by speaking about Leo Kanner, talking about the way that the children he studied like to do the same thing over and over again. And people with autism are often like that they will like things to be systematic, they will like things to be predictable, and if things aren't, which the world often isn't, they may impose their own systematic preferences onto the world by following a routine, by preferring a routine, by not liking it when that routine is disrupted, perhaps even by doing the same things over and over again, even watching the same movies over and over again.
So I'm actually not familiar with that aspect of autism. I'm not familiar with that aspect nearly at all. I'm aware of like the social communicative differences, the sensory differences, the systematizing differences. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. If anyone is, like, please let me know in the chat. Garthan, it happens with music. Can you elaborate on that, please? Because this bit I am ignorant to. Sensory stuff I actually can relate to, because I am absolutely disgusted by the feeling and sensation of plastic. It actually turns me inside. It's freaking god awful. Like, if anyone hands me like a plastic cup of like something I need to drink, I will look at that cup and just feel disdain run through my body. And it's not because, it's because it's bad for the environment, but it's the sensation of the plastic on my lips and on my body. Freaking turns me inside, dude. So I kind of relate to the sensory stuff, but I don't know anything about the systematizing differences. If an autistic likes a song a lot, they'll listen to it over and over. That's fair. All right. I am guilty of this, admittedly. Fair, 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 fair. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, when the beat goes, dude. Which to me, I would have assumed that that's just kind of like a normal person kind of thing. Like I say normal, sorry, typical. I just assumed that this is kind of like a typical sort of behavior. I didn't realize like maybe that's just like an example amongst a load of different possible like systematic differences examples. But and like Grant stated that like people with autism like the world to operate predictably. And maybe what like as Gartham states, if some element of predictability could be like listening to the same music over and over again. I mean, Grant stated well, someone might like watch the same movie over and over again. I do not know if I don't know. I was the same with plastic when I was little, drove my parents crazy, wouldn't drink anything out of plastic. Yeah, I still don't. I was mildly better actually when I was a child, and as I've gotten older, it's just gotten worse. I absolutely hate the sensation of plastic on my mouth and on my skin in general. Like Lily, you might know, you know those plastic those plastic yogurt containers where it's like 2/3 of the yogurt is yogurt, and the other third is like this kind of cereal or like stuff that you would tip into the yogurt, mix it all about, and I forgot what it's called. But like kids had it all the time in like primary school. But I would watch them like tear open the lid and then lick the yogurt off the lid, and like the lid's like total plastic. And I remember seeing that and just feeling disgust. Like, ugh, how dare you? What the frig are you doing, man? And then I tried it once and I was like, oh, Lord, what the frig's that sensation? I hate that so much. Oh, God. Sucks so I hated it so much, dude. I would freaking tear my eyes out before doing that again. Yeah, I do think it's only in the UK. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it in the US. Synthetic materials, yes, I will wear synthetic materials. Actually, no, not polystyrene. One of the various, cloth poly things. Yes, I will wear synthetic materials, but it's stuff like. Okay, when I say on my skin, I really mean like polyester. Thank you, polyester. When I say on my skin, I really primarily mean like the really sensitive bits of my skin, like your lips. I really freaking hate that. But it's not every single synthetic. It's like plastic bags and like plastic cups, etc. Plastic straws. Freaking hate plastic straws. I actually freaking love paper straws. They're great because I don't have the freaking sensory problems when I touch that. But like on my hands, it's mostly fine unless it's wet. And then if it is wet, it friggin' turns me. Not sure. Don't know what the deal is, but I friggin' hate it. I did love the smell of that weird yogurt, though. It did smell good. Yeah, it did. It also tasted good. Plastic cutlery, I hate it so much. It's just sensory differences, you know. Anyway, enough talking about my sensory problems. Engaging autism, honoring God. What has Grant got to say?
Over and over again, even watching the same movies over and over again. And then the third cluster of characteristics is that people with autism will often have sensory differences. In fact, will typically have sensory differences. Up until relatively recently, this
just went on a friggin' tangent about my personal sensory problems. So this bit I can relate to. It's the systematic one that he was talking about. Like I don't understand that. And I would like more elaboration on that. But the social communicative differences, the sensory differences, I know a little bit more about. Let's see what he has to say.
Sensory aspect of autism was almost treated as something of a side effect or a sideshow to the more central things of the social and communicative and systematizing differences. Increasingly in recent years, the sensory elements have come to occupy a central place in the discussion of autism. People with autism typically process sensory information differently. Now, again, that can present in a whole range of different ways. Sometimes people with autism can be hyposensitive, so they might not register data that another person will register immediately. They might, if you like, to use a Spinal Tap illusion, they might need the amp turned up to 11 before they really hear anything. Often, though, they're hypersensitive. So things that will be not noticeable to other people or will be minimally significant to other people, or may very swiftly fade into the background for other people, will be vivid, oversaturated, strong for someone with autism. Now, one of the things that's important to say about this is it's not that their senses are any sharper or less sharp in terms of their receptors or nerve endings than anyone else. But what seems to be the case is that the centers in the brain that filter and translate sensory information into your picture of the world don't work the same way for people with autism that they do for other people. So most of the time we filter out most of our sensory information. I mean, this is probably a dangerous thing to suggest, but probably few of you have really given a whole lot of thought to the pressure being exerted on your backside by the seat you're sitting on. Because fairly swiftly, your brain said to you, that information is not important. I'm here now. I'm in for the duration. So let's just forget about that. And we do that all the time with all kinds of sensory information. We smell something, our brain initially thinks, hey, that's nice, hey, that's nasty, and then very quickly starts to filter it out. Background noise, we very quickly filter out. But people with autism don't necessarily do that. Their brain doesn't necessarily stop processing that input. It keeps on being there. It may be louder, more vivid, colors may be more saturated, or it may be different. So a perfume or a hair product that for you smells delightful may for someone with autism smell overpowering, or it may smell painful. So that perfume may smell to them like having a screwdriver stabbed in your head. It's not simply that it smells strong, it smells different. And that's what's tied into the language we often use of sensory overload. That processing this massive sensory information can lead to the person simply being crushed by it, fatigued by it often. So even if they're not overwhelmed by it, the activity that's involved in mastering that information and not being constantly thrown over by it can leave the person exhausted. And exhaustion is a big factor within autism. It's where the sensory overload can often lead to what are known as meltdowns for people with autism, which are different from tantrums. And this is one of the big challenges we often face, is that people see a meltdown and they think it's a tantrum. But
I'm actually aware of this bit that he's about to talk about. The meltdown stuff. Yeah, I know some people who have to deal with this in their own personal lives. And witnessing it can be quite, if you're unaware of what is happening, a meltdown. It can be quite confusing and feel like almost like a big deal is being made over something that doesn't feel like it's actually a big deal. When actually, and I believe like Grant is going to, as he's going to discuss this, he'll, elaborate. But in the experience of the autistic person, what leads to a meltdown is in fact a very real experience on their behalf. Whilst one can perceive the meltdown as being an exaggeration on one's behavior or whatever, it's certainly not like exaggerated in their experience. Like it's a very real thing that they're experiencing. It's very exhausting on their part. It sucks. So he's gonna discuss that a little bit. I'm aware of meltdowns and what have you. They're very, very odd experiences, but like, dudes can't help it. Like, you can't. If you're gonna experience, if an autistic person experiences a meltdown, like you can't help it. They can't help it. I'm under the impression. It's just a sensory overload or whatever, like, or something. I'm not sure. Let Grant speak. He's the one who knows stuff about this stuff.
And so even if they're not overwhelmed by it, the activity that's involved in mastering that information and not being constantly thrown over by it can leave the person exhausted. And exhaustion is a big factor within autism. It's where the sensory overload can often lead to what are known as meltdowns for people with autism, which are different from tantrums. And this is one of the big challenges we often face, is that people see a meltdown and they think it's a tantrum. But a tantrum is typically motivated by not getting what you want, and basically going a bit raj, as we would say in Scotland, in order to try and get what you want. Whereas a meltdown for someone who's autistic is simply that the capacity to manage this sensory overload just finally hits breaking point. You melt down. You might deal with that by various behaviors, by what's known as stimming, where you stimulate something, maybe by flapping, maybe by spinning, maybe by just stroking a part of your body that is soothed by that action. But you need to do something. So that's a very quick overview. It's a very thin overview of some of the characteristics of autism. And in just a moment, I'm going to...
What's one of the scariest side effects of type 2? Losing a foot! And anyone who's been on metformin for more than 60 days...
Yeah, anyway.
Talk a little bit about how we account for autism, some of the explanations. But it's worth saying that what we've seen over the last few decades has been a massive shift in our statistics about autism, and with it, a massive shift in the culture and in the language around autism. So we've seen a huge shift in incidence. In Leo Kanner's work, 1 in 10,000 children was estimated to have autism. Now the estimates are anywhere from 1 in 200 to 1 in 50 or even 1 in 40. Importantly, those are
big change in numbers there, dude. Like 1 in 10,000 is not the same as 1 in like 50 or 40, which very interesting development.
Estimates. The actual diagnostic rates are still catching up as awareness of autism continues to filter into the community, and as the diagnostic services themselves catch up with the demand of actually diagnosing people. As that's happened, there's been an increasing place for the advocacy of those who themselves are autistic, many of whom were only diagnosed as adults, and who are now, as adults, who now recognize that the thing that's made them feel weird, often for much of their life, or for which they've been made to feel weird for much of their life, is actually autism. And now increasingly, they have a voice and a place for advocacy.
Yippee.
So the incidence of autism, and with it, the advocacy for autism has changed massively in recent years. And awareness of autism has changed massively in recent years, which, by the way, is a good and a bad thing. The good thing is that people are aware of autism as an issue. The bad thing is that when they want to find out about autism, they go to the wrong sources. So one of the challenges we have, I think I might have been about to say this in a moment, but let me just say it now. One of the challenges we have within the church is that there is often a growing awareness of autism, but people are working with bad accounts of autism. So they're often working with the stereotypical representations of autism that the media often develops, or even that storytellers use on television, for example, or they're working with outdated language about autism and outdated scholarship on autism. Paradigms that actual autism researchers gave up on 10 years ago, but still dominate the popular landscape within churches as people talk about autism. So the incidence of autism as a recognized thing has really changed. It's important to say the major factor in that shift of incidence is the move from talking about autism as a severe, stable point condition to thinking about autism as a spectrum. Because as soon as we recognize how diverse and complicated and variegated autism is, we begin to recognize how many more people might present its characteristics. So there are lots of conspiracy theories about autism, but the real significant factor in the massive rise in estimated incidence is that we've moved from speaking about autism as a point condition to speaking about autism as a spectrum. And
remarkable commentary, Lily. Thanks.
as awareness has grown around that, the recognition of how frequent it is, how common it is, has also grown. One of the big things that's also part of that, and this is only in the last few years, has been a recognition that autism is fairly evenly distributed across the genders. Until a few years ago, the received wisdom was that autism was massively more common among males than among females.
Yeah, it's what I've seen autism get stereotyped mostly as a male thing, and especially amongst like male boys rather than like male men, even though it's not something that it's not exactly like something that goes away when you become an adult. It's just something you learn to live with better, I guess. But I've seen a lot of stereotyping autism with male boys. Male boys with boys. Saying the same thing twice. Oops. But I don't hear a lot about like women with autism or like what their experience is like, or like young girls with autism. So he's going to briefly talk about that, I think.
That's no longer the case. And in the last few years, the evidence suggests that actually the gender spread is broadly even. And that the reason that autism was less widely recognized among females is because females are naturally better at camouflaging it, even in childhood. So that even in childhood, girls don't show that they're autistic as visibly as boys do. And that's one of the reasons that their autism is often not picked up on until much later in life. That also has huge implications for much of the research in autism, which is focused on male populations. Now, with all of this has also gone a shift in the language that's used about autism. So for one thing, we frequently use the language of the autism spectrum.
From what I've heard as well, like one of the reasons why women don't get seen or diagnosed or whatever, perceived as being on the spectrum when they are, is largely down to a term like the masking. That's a term when you kind of try and play, put on your neurotypical mask and pretend, which I know someone who does that, and they are it is very exhausting for them to pretend to be neurotypical so that they can fit in with everyone else around them, society. We live in one, and et cetera, et cetera. I believe Grant is gonna come back to the discussing like women with autism bit. And I think he's gonna say that they're just naturally better at hiding it. No, I don't know what he's gonna say explicitly, but I think one of my few things that I'm gonna critically engage on in his first half is that I doubt that if women go underdiagnosed, even though it is broadly a 50-50 split between men and women who are actually on the spectrum, or if women just don't get perceived as being on the spectrum, I doubt it's because they're just naturally better at behaving like they're neurotypical or just whatever, but that there are probably more social and systemic explanations for why they may not be perceived. Like they have to perform. They already do have to perform a certain way. I don't know. This person I know is a female, so I know things about the masking because of their experience, but not enough from like papers or whatever. Purely just like because I know someone. Anyway.
For another, there's been a growing awareness of what it means to speak respectfully about autism. Now, here's the interesting thing. The medical community, and actually certainly in the UK, the government and its guidelines, have often felt that the best way to speak respectfully about autism is to use what's known as person-first language. So we speak...
Yeah, Dax, that's pretty much, yeah. I think part of the reason that girls get underdiagnosed is because, like, and this guy was talking about it, the history of the studies was focused on young boys, and so the behaviors of young boys became like, oh, this is what autism must be like, and young girls don't display those exact same behaviors, and so they go underdiagnosed because the same methodology that we use to diagnose young boys doesn't transfer over to young girls. I think that's why. I think he actually says that as well in his talk, that's why girls may go underdiagnosed, but we'll see.
Speak about persons with autism rather than speaking about autistic people or the autistic. Autistic people themselves don't like that. And this is one of the interesting things that's emerged in recent research, that they find that actually strangely othering. And they find it othering because it makes it sound as though their personhood and their autism are detachable from one another. As though you could basically lift their autism off them and they would be the same person. Where for them, their whole identity is wrapped up in their autism. So they would rather be spoken of as an autistic person, allowing their disability to define their personhood in really important ways. Now, along with this, I'm sorry, by the way, well, actually, no, I'm not sorry. I'm taking...
I'm not sorry. Yeah, he's not sorry. I find that point that he just made, I don't know, to me that just seems like a case-by-case basis. I would ask the person, like, hey, how do you prefer to be referred to? An autistic person or a person with autism? I don't know. Just ask the person, I guess. Which I think he also concedes, like, yes, person by person.
Quite a while to describe autism, and I think that's very important because the misinformation about autism is dreadful. So, yeah, I'm not going to apologize for taking as long as I'm doing here. Along with the points I've just made, what's also emerged from research in recent years is the statistical co-occurrence of autism with other conditions. And actually, surveys have shown that almost every medical condition occurs with a higher frequency in the autistic population than it does in the wider population.
Like ADHD.
But certain conditions present more commonly even than these. So anxiety and depression are dramatically more common within the autistic population, as are eating disorders, particularly with females, and as is suicide or attempted suicide. Suicide actually is 5 times more common statistically among autistic people than it is in the wider population. Now, I think we need to be careful about talking about this, and I mention it not to scaremonger or to suggest that if you're dealing with an autistic person, you need to be ready for this immediately. Because as we've said before, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. But it is part of the picture of the pastoral reality of autism that we need to be alert to. And one of the dangers at the moment is that the pro-autism advocacy movement can sometimes run the risk of being perceived as a sort of everything is awesome thing, where you want to say that autism is not a bad thing, autism is a good thing. What we need to be careful to stress is, as someone said to me over dinner, that autism may be a good thing without stopping being a difficult thing or a hard thing. And autism, its co-occurrence with other conditions, is something that we need to recognize.
I would just
for autism. Let me first of all start with this definition, which I've taken from the website of the National Autistic Association in the UK, which is that autism is a lifelong disability which affects how people communicate and interact with the world. That's generally an accepted description of autism. Some people don't like the language of disability and would prefer simply to talk about difference or condition. And while I respect that, other people would want to affirm that their particular difference can be very disabling, but would want to talk about the fact that what disables them is not necessarily that condition, but is the world and the way the world works. So that's an important point. What's really critical about this definition...
That is a very important... I think that would be a very important point. Like, what makes it especially difficult is not the condition itself, but the world that they have to live in. Yeah, that's fair. Because it's a... So if the condition's gonna... If the condition makes like communication and sensory stuff and I don't know, what was the systematic stuff? I don't know. Kind of more difficult or just different than the typical experience, which is how we built the world according to typical experience. Yeah, it makes the conditions hard because the condition may be hard because typical experience does not accommodate to it. Typical experience accommodates to typical experience as opposed to a divergent experience. So that, yeah, I think that's a valid and fair point on Grant's part. Thank you, Grant. Very cool.
Works. So that's an important point. What's really critical about this definition, though, is that it emphasizes that autism is not something that goes away. It's a lifelong condition. It's not something from which people are healed. And that's, I think, very important because within the church, often autism is approached as something that can be healed, that can be prayed away, that can be transformed. And pastorally, that's not the reality that people will typically encounter.
Pray the condition away is cringe AF and just leads to people getting hurt. Cringe AF.
Now, I say that not because I don't believe in healing, but because I don't believe that that's principally the way that we should think about this, at least not in the way that we often think about healing. And I'll say more about that in just a second. In terms of explanations for autism, there have been various conspiracy theories, of which you may be aware, theories that vaccination programs cause autism. I won't say much about that, except to say that the study that kicked all that off was subsequently retracted by the journal it was published in, and the lead author was struck off by the British Medical Association or by the British Medical Council for fraudulent activity. Various elements of undisclosed fraud emerged from subsequent review of that study. And multiple studies since have demonstrated that the research was not correct. So multiple studies have challenged the vaccination link. As with any good conspiracy theory, there are elements that, if you like, elements of limited truth that underpin it. So that particular theory claimed that vaccines interfered with gut processes, and that as a consequence of the gut processes, neurological development was compromised. What's probably true about that, and again, this is a limited truth, let me just stress that. What's probably true about that is that many people with autism do present gut problems and gut abnormalities, digestive disorders and so on. But the vaccines didn't cause them. It's more likely that actually these are associated with the autism rather than causing the autism.
That's a really nice story, Lily. I like that story. Very cool. Very nice. Very wholesome.
So that's a really important point. The take-home point is that there is no scientifically upheld evidence for the vaccine link. Instead, what's been emerging over the last few years has been an increasing number of potentially significant genetic factors, none of which is a single cause, but several of which might combine or function independently to create symptoms of autism. Typically, those symptoms are wrapped up with neurological development. So one of the keys with autism is that autism is wrapped up in what's sometimes described as the wiring of the brain, and basically the wiring of the neurological system throughout our bodies. So autism doesn't go away, but diagnostic status can change for people as the medical definitions change. For years, for example, Asperger's syndrome as a category has been removed from the Diagnostic Statistic Manual in North America. The International Diagnostic Manual, the ICD, hasn't made that change yet, but seems to be moving in that direction. And that's meant that people's diagnostic status has shifted. It's also important to say that as we think about autism, we need to be careful about allowing the medical account and medical explanation of autism to be the only way that we speak of autism. Autism, at the end of the day, is an experience. And that's an experience that is not confined to one's medical experience. So this is a really important point, and it's going to lead us on to the next slide. Within the medical, healthcare, and research communities, people often think about autism as if it just is autism. And where autism connects with, for example, faith commitments or with other experiences, that it's a little bit like sticking blocks of Lego together. The autism block is just the autism block, and it doesn't change. And you might build other things around it, but the autism block is still the autism block. Where the reality is that autism experienced by people with faith conditions generates a different experience. Now, that can be good or it can be bad, depending on how those faith commitments are shaped by our normative traditions. So let's move on to that. Now, hopefully it's pretty clear that what I've just described will affect the way that people experience the reality of church. For one thing, churches are sensory environments and churches are social environments, maybe more so than most of us recognize. So when we walk into a church, we're immediately confronted by a social environment where people interact, and where elements are often added to that social interaction in ways that various people will think enhances the social interaction, and for
a lot of people, no doubt it probably does.
Improves the cohesion of the group, improves the sense of fellowship and community. So we add things that for most people might be delightful. That time of coffee afterwards where everyone shakes hands and trades stories, the exchanging of peace within a service, that for many people might be delightful. The bit where the pastor says, let's all just take a few minutes and turn to someone around you and just say hi and tell them a little bit about yourself.
I freaking hate that bit, dude. I do not like. It's freaking get up and say hello to your neighbor. Oh, dude. Nah, man. I don't want to get up and say hello to my neighbor. Like, it's just so freaking awkward, dude. Like, I'll get up and look someone hey, hello, shake hand. Thanks. Anyway, get back to the service, please. I don't want to do this. Yeah, I don't like that bit. Little coffee and crap and donuts and crap like afterwards, like I freaking love. Like, I love it when dudes stay behind after church and hang out. But if you don't know anyone, or if if you don't know anyone or whatever, it's also a stressful environment. Really friggin' stressful if you don't know anyone, because otherwise you just like it feels like you're just standing around twiddling your thumbs, kind of waiting. Or at least this is my experience. Standing around twiddling thumbs, waiting for like, I don't know, someone to talk to you, but you don't want to be that first one to talk to someone else, because like, what the hell do you talk about? Like, what do you say? Hello, my name's Theocracy. I'm not telling you my real name. I work at a place, and I think Jesus is cool. I don't know, dude. What do you talk about? I find those social interactions quite stressful. But for a lot of people, I understand that it's very lovely and they enjoy it quite a lot. And that's fine. It's very cool that you like it. I'm not a big fan. But at the same time, when it goes well, I'm a very, very big fan. It's just it's difficult. It's a difficult one. Yeah, that's that. Leave a comment in the chat below if you also friggin' struggle to say hello to anybody.
That might be fine for you. For someone who's autistic, it might be fine, but it might not be fine. That might actually be profoundly uncomfortable, profoundly difficult. Wrapped up with that is the way in which we often, it's about just how often, once you began to become a real Christian, you would begin to attend more services than just one. So if you're a real Christian, you will be attending 2 services on a Sunday, and you'll also attend the prayer meeting on a Wednesday. And there's
okay, so I love the sign of peace. Give a hug or give a hug or shake hand. I like the shake hand stuff. Sorry, I don't know if I'm buffering or whatever's happening. Also, my computer is gonna die soon, so I really need to get on that. But I mean, I can bring my microphone with me. Can I? I don't know where I left my charger. 1 second. Give me a sec. I'm gonna put some friggin' music on because I want to pause Grant. Actually, I'll give you a Seinfeld meme. Sorry, I didn't realize I didn't put the loop on. Do it again.
Funny guy! Right Funny guy! Right Funny guy!
Over. Intermission over. I got my laptop charger. Thank you. Scratching my little nose. I like the shaking hands. I think I do like saying hello to my neighbors. When the pastor says, get up and say hello to your neighbor. I think I do kind of like it, but at the same time, it kind of stresses me out. I don't mind shaking hands. I especially like Lily brought up like Anglicanism and crap like that. What? Kind of like say your peace, like peace to your neighbors. Yeah, I like that. I would never hug my neighbor. Not a chance. Not a chance alive. Not happening. Get your filthy arms away from me, please. We're not that close. But like shaking hands, yeah, I love a gooey handshake or a little fist bump. But I mean, yeah, I also miss that a little bit of the Anglican service. What I love in the Anglican service is the benediction at the very end. Like, hey, peace out, yo. We've sinned. It's cool because Jesus loves us and we're rejecting our sin. Peace to all of you. And then you leave. Or, well, the service ends and you hang out afterwards. I like that a lot. But talking to my neighbors who also love Christ is very hard. Not because they're my brothers in Christ or my sisters in Christ, but they're human. And I find socializing very, very hard. Wow. Anyway, enough talking about my social incompetencies. Give a hug, Theop, to your brothers and sisters. I don't want to. It's so uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable. I don't want that.
There's these other fellowship activities that you really should want to be at. And here's the key thing. The justification for that would be to quote verses like Hebrews, let us not give up meeting together, and all the more as we see the day. The justification for that would be to quote verses like Hebrews, let us not give up meeting together, and all the more as we see the day approaching. So people in very well-intentioned ways would say, I just can't understand a Christian.
This isn't a thing I've experienced in the United States. This is a thing I have experienced in the UK and Northern Ireland. I've not seen any churches where I live in the US that do evening services, which I really don't like. Like, I love the evening service, like, so much. I hate morning services. I hate getting up that early. I don't like getting up for a thing that starts at like 9 o'clock, because that means I have to get up at 8 o'clock. I don't want to do it, man. I don't want to do that. Not because I don't like getting up early, because I'm a bartender. I work so late into the night that getting up like before 10 o'clock is hard, dude. So I don't like morning services. I like evening services. But like, none of the churches in this town do evening services. It sucks. Compared to the UK, and Northern Ireland, where my Anglican church is. Evening services. It was great. I loved it so much. So yeah, like, who would miss that opportunity? I don't know.
And if you're someone who finds social interaction to be important but exhausting,
yes,
then you might very deliberately attend church services. But attending more than one church service might actually be very destructive for you, because after that service, you need time to rest, to recover, because you've been processing all the social stuff that for others might be really natural and really straightforward, but for you is really difficult.
I've seen this firsthand with people that I love and care about. A lot, actually. They would want to attend or do something that's very social and important, but they do not have the energy for it. Like, as Grant stated earlier, like, exhaustion is a big deal in autism, or something. And like, so dudes might want to attend something social, and maybe they do, but they are spent afterwards. I've seen a lot of that in, like, some people I know. It's very interesting to witness, because like, I don't necessarily relate, and so I find like witnessing that very odd. It's a very interesting experience. But anyway, I guess. So yes, I've seen that firsthand. I can concur with what he stated.
There are also sensory elements in church. So people will wear people will buy certain kinds from their hair. People will buy certain kinds of hand soap,
yes,
and put them in the church bathroom. There will also be noises. So there may be a band, and that band may be playing through a PA, or the preacher may be speaking through a PA. And the person working the PA may not quite understand how gain dials and EQs work. So there may be frequencies that are very difficult for you to listen to. Which coincidentally are almost always in the 1 to 2 kilohertz range, just for people who are working the sound desk. And they can be really difficult. Events may or may not be predictable. So in certain churches, that stays the same, and so that no one gets bored by the sameness. So you think you want to change things, which for you might be a good thing, but for someone else, that lack of predictability might actually be very, very difficult.
You would love the Anglican Church. Very predictable.
So the sensory, social,
Are we done buffering yet? Flip's sake, dude.
predictability. So the sensory, social, and predictability issues of church are really massive. But at the same time, churches for people with autism are often their community. They're often the place where they like to belong, where they feel they belong. You know, there's a myth that autistic people don't like socializing or are
If you're experiencing like bad buffering on my live stream, I do apologize. I spend a lot of money on my internet for not a lot of payback. Thank you, Verizon. Friggin' sucks.
They do like community, but they need the community to accommodate the fact that they will process it differently. So churches are the communities for people with autism, just as they're the communities for others. And they're also very often the frontline care providers for people with autism. Pastors are often the people who take up the slack.
Frick's sake, dude. Just as we're also like, where I can make a lot more commentary. Or just like, I don't know, critically engage more. So if we're gonna experience way more buffering, then that's just friggin' sucks, dude.
People who bring particular needs into the community. So the autistic person's perception of the church will be shaped in all kinds of ways by their autism, and their experience of the church will shape their perception and experience of their autism. That's a crucial thing to stress.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the character of the church and the character of the commitments of the church will be pivotal to that. Then on the flip side,
Frick me, dude. I would love, so when that happens, when the picture goes away, does audio also go away? If someone could let me know, that would be fantastic. Because if the audio stays, I'm happy to keep it running, but I'm assuming that the audio cuts if the image cuts.
it
God, dude. My friggin' potato Wi-Fi is crumbling. Jeez, dude.
who are typically likable because they're like us. So we like people who say the things we want to hear and who agree with the things we say. And when you have someone who comes along who is socially awkward, who doesn't necessarily do some of these things, who can sometimes be hard to speak to, or if they're a profoundly autistic person, maybe a profoundly autistic child, disrupts the environment of the church.
And we're back. Okay. So I need to go back like 20 seconds.
Profoundly autistic person, or who doesn't necessarily do some of these things, who can sometimes be hard to speak to, or if they're a profoundly autistic person, or maybe a profoundly autistic child, disrupts the environment of the church in difficult ways. We don't like them. I've spoken to multiple people who
Friggin' chugging, man. Chug, chug, chug. Okay. Can we please? Like, do I have to like turn the visual quality like down to? So you can see every single pixel? Right.
pattern of
Okay. My Wi-Fi is crippling itself. It is terrified of performing. Yeah, we're gonna do that. We're gonna have an intermission. Come back in 3 minutes, folks. Cause jeez, dude. God damn, dude. Okay. Intermission. So that my Wi-Fi can have a break, I guess. I'm live streaming, so I need Wi-Fi for that. My phone connects to the Wi-Fi, so it connects to the laptop as a camera. So 2 devices are connected to Wi-Fi in this house right now. Poor thing, like poor little thing, poor machine. Oh man. Yeah, it's tea time. Go grab your cup of tea. I'll be back in 3 minutes. There we go. Back in 3 minutes. I'm gonna get some water. All right. I'm not optimistic, dude. I'm not optimistic, dude. That this is gonna go well. Because I don't think it's a video loading problem or like a buffering problem. I think this is a my Wi-Fi sucks problem, and so it's just struggling to connect. Little cattle's probably running right now. Making tea. I don't like tea. Okay, so yes, might as well. Honestly, just might as well, dude. Like, freaking hell, what am I supposed to do? Yeah. Okay, we're gonna try this again. Just took the tea bag out. Oh, let's go. Oh, come on. Bags of tea. You put milk and sugar in it? Like, did you hear that noise that I just made while I think it was buffering? That would be useful to know. All right. Come on. I'm trying to press things. Jeez. Lily's putting the milk in her tea. Good stuff, mate. That's good stuff, mate. My wife likes to put milk and sugar in her tea. She puts way too much sugar in it, but she might not do that anymore. That's what she used to do when she first moved to my country. Put like way too much sugar in her tea. It was god awful. Right. Come on, please. Work. Good half. Oh my god. Because, like, this is the good half of the... I'm not like the first half isn't good. It's just the... My Wi-Fi box knows that this is the bit I'm excited about. It's friggin... screw you, put you slag. Friggin' slag, man. I hate my Wi-Fi. Okay, let's just try our best. Gortham, you got your little intermission done. Right.
That's about the
We'll go back like 20 seconds. Okay. Well, I think we're gonna have to call it quits, man. My Wi-Fi is not doing well. So one more time for good luck. If this one doesn't work, then I think we're gonna have to cut it quits. If this is the last time I'm trying.
left churches because the churches couldn't accommodate them. Or who have been asked to leave churches because their children disrupted
Okay. Bear with me. Okay. All right. Well, I'm just gonna call it quits on the lecture. I'm happy enough to keep live streaming until like a little bit after 7 o'clock, but I'm just gonna call it quits there. Evidence. Good stuff. Evidently, my Wi-Fi is not going to cooperate. It's like a patch. I'm really not asking for much, but whatever. Okay, we're gonna call it quits there. Yeah, friggin' rip. I know. So this live stream was more apparently. Who saw this one coming? Just hey, what is autism? I think we'll do this again. We'll just make a second half where we live stream the other half of Grant's lecture. And what has the church got to do with it? Whoa. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll probably do that next week. The second half of Grant's lecture, where he gets into the theological application of, autistic people, and like how the church can engage with people on the spectrum. But I mean, until then, like, what did we learn from the first half of his lecture? Admittedly, I didn't learn anything that I don't think I already knew personally. Beyond that, the condition is not very well understood by ordinary people. Also, something I already knew. And also, the studies themselves have not always been all that great, etc., etc. But some important takeaways, generally speaking, on like what the condition itself is like. At least according to Grant's lecture here, social and communicative differences from typical people, sensory differences, and systematic differences. Generally, that third one being that the person with autism likes predictability. And so the social and communicative differences can look like a person being really kind of awkward, also a little too atypical person, maybe a bit weird, but so can be extra, but or maybe just like eccentric. I think that was a word that he used, eccentric. I find that with some of my friends, like my mate Ethan, who like not long after we met, like okay, first time we met, we went straight into like what we were talking about, and anytime we would like do little voice Zoom calls with each other, just like have fun, catch up, whatever. It was immediately getting into the admittedly the fun, the theology rather than just like small talking, getting to know each other. Which for some people, I suppose, that might be a bother. I've seen, at least according to the various people I've met, that they struggle to communicate with people. And this gets perceived as they are being rude or incompetent or awkward, when that's not the intent on the autistic friend's part. It's just their social and communicative differences, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, that's generally speaking the takeaway. Love and respect all folks, regardless, maybe, is probably going to be the most obvious takeaway. And yeah, I mean, it is an obvious takeaway, but also like, how do you do that? And Grant goes into that in the second half of the lecture. He gets into that, how you what's it called? Love and respect, and provide space for these sorts of people. He does get into it. Just a suggestion. You don't have to love and respect. Don't have to do anything. exhaustion. Grant states that exhaustion is a big deal for these kinds of people. I say these kinds of people with autism, as well as the melt. So the meltdowns one, I've already done all the commentary on that earlier, but the meltdown stuff, I have seen firsthand. It is a very interesting experience to witness, and I think he said right that it can be perceived as like they're having a tantrum, only the differences between like a meltdown and a tantrum is a tantrum you're doing something to I don't know, get what you want, as opposed to because you didn't get what you want, as opposed to a meltdown, which is what happens, sensory overload, basically. Because autism can have this sensory impact where you sense things differently, and you can, whilst your brain, and Grant stated that you've tuned out that feeling of your butt to chair. For some people, that's just not how it happens, and various sensory things, whether it's smells or sounds or taste or touch, can be a bit overwhelming for some people, which can lead to a meltdown. That sort of stuff, I suppose just being aware that that's the sort of thing that can happen is very useful, because it can lead to understanding that that is what happens and it's happening with this kind of person, and leads to the grace that is required can lead to the understanding that we need to offer grace when this does happen. Okay, fair enough. This is a thing that happens. We love you and we want to try and support you. How can we support you? Blah blah blah. Amongst other things, I liked Grant's point about how autism will impact one's experience of church, and that one's experience of church will impact their view of their own selves. And so that's an important point he stated. And the reason that is important, and he elaborates on this in the second half that we're not going to be watching. What the frick? It's important because you may perceive yourself as being the problem. Someone with autism may perceive themselves as being the problem, like maybe they're overreacting to something, or they're weird, or something else. Some other negative connotation to why they just don't happen to be experiencing what everyone else seems to experience as just, hey, we take this thing for granted, but the person with autism is experiencing that thing that typical people would take for granted very differently. And so may perceive themselves as being the problem, when it's not that they're the problem. They're not a problem at all. It's just that they experience things differently. So, yeah. Those are some takeaways from Grant's little lecture. The first half of his little lecture, he goes into other things in the second half, but we can't see that because my Wi-Fi sucks. So, I hope you find this insightful in some way, shape, or form. I know I did. I know I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Just exactly, total side gig in Christianity. Yeah. To some people, maybe. To some folks, I suppose. But not us, Chads. Not us. Absolute flipping Christ boys. Christy boys. Not to us, lads. We love and respect all folks, regardless. Maybe. Maybe. I'm kidding. So, yeah, I know you're kidding. It's not a problem. Kids, kids who just put random things in their mouths and pretend they're smoking. We sure do like to pretend that we smoke here on Theocracy. Anyway, Lily, you were here from the start. What did you learn? If anything at all. Maybe all you learned was that my Wi-Fi sucks. I would be interested in knowing. But I would be interested. Yes. Yes, you did learn that my Wi-Fi sucks. Yes, that's right. But if there's anyone else in the chat, aside from Lily, what did you learn from Grant Macaskill's little lecture on autism? We will do the second half of his lecture some other time because my Wi-Fi is crapping itself, which will be the theological application, where we'll be able to say more rather than just admittedly listening to Grant and kind of just nodding our heads and be like, wow, that's really interesting. Wow, I'm learning so much. Wow, I have no qualifications in whatever you're talking about. I think to just be careful to give folks the grace to be who they are, whether they be healed or not. Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, that's fair. Bear with each other's scruples. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. Your comment reminds me of the Bible Project. Pardon me. Goodness gracious. Bible Projects. I was making notes about it one time. Where is it? Frig, I don't know. But it reminds me of sorry, I'm distracted by comments that I will interact with. Lily's comment, bear with each other's scruples. It reminds me of a Bible Project episode on Eden, I believe, the Tower of Babel as well, maybe. Where in Eden, Adam and Eve were naked with each other. It's not about nudity. It's about what the nudity represents. Which they were very intimate with each other. They would have known each other inside out. They would have been trusting with each other. Largely, the trust is that they were naked with each other and unashamed is the especially important bit, the being unashamed. Sends an image of that these people could be themselves with each other, that there was love and unity and a union between them. And if they didn't eat the friggin' fruit from the tree, because they were commanded to, multiply, this would have been, we're supposed to understand this would be the ideal experience of, humanity. But that we would know each other and be able to exist unashamed alongside each other, but eating from that tree the knowledge of good and bad causes us to determine what is good in our own eyes and what is bad in our own eyes. And part of the shame and divide between human beings is being able to determine good and bad in our own eyes. And we see our neighbor over there as he thinks that what I think is good, he says is bad, and vice versa, which means we divide from each other and we can't be naked around each other anymore because there is a barrier which creates shame, and that shame creates distrust. Well, that barrier also creates distrust, no longer cooperating. In general, Eden being the image of human love and unity as a corporate whole, without shame and without judgment, whilst post-fruit eating, those positives are done away with and replaced with negatives. We can't trust each other. We can't be ourselves around each other under the fear of judgment and shame. And that's also something that Arthur Schopenhauer, depressed ass friggin' German from the 19th century philosopher, calls the hedgehog's dilemma. You should look up the hedgehog's dilemma in your own spare time. But broadly speaking, it just means that it's supposed to be actually about porcupines. Porcupines are big and spiky, and in the winter they would need to huddle together for warmth, but their spikes hurt each other, so they stay far away from each other. And yeah, well, that's a dilemma. It's supposed to represent the challenge of human intimacy. That for warmth and heat, I suppose, we must be near each other, but when we get close to each other, we hurt each other. And I would contend that that is a byproduct of eating from the fruits of the good and bad, knowledge of good and bad. So, a person with autism may struggle to be themselves around people because they may fear that, if I am myself, if I am myself unfiltered around ordinary people, typical people, sorry, and if instead of, hello, how are you doing? Weather's lovely. Yes, nice. I work as a bartender, blah, blah, blah. And instead, the Tower of Babel as a friggin' mirror opposite of Eden is the Tower of Babel. Mirror opposite of Eden. Real terrible human rebellion where we try and manipulate God for our purposes and tear him out of heaven and make him something that we can, negotiate and trade with. What the frick are you on about? I don't know who you are. Why are you talking about these things to me? Because it's really interesting. And it's like, well, maybe this is just my experience. I don't know. But generally speaking, I suppose someone with autism may assume that they can't really be themselves around typical people, or that their experience might be viewed as weird. And so they may have to also put up their own barrier when they're around people. And that might be a big struggle, might be exhausting. And so there's a lot of undiagnosed adults. My phone's ringing. There's a lot of undiagnosed adults. And so who knows what their experience is like. But what up? You just got to see a little bit of my house. But yeah, I'm gonna have to cut the live stream. Whoa, there. But I will interact with some of your little comments right now. I'm just gonna have to cut it short. I say short. This is longer than it actually should have been, to be honest. Hey, what up, Matt? Last name. I missed it, but if it's about autism, I'm seminary where folks with autism who thought it was who they are, or so thought it was part of their own. Sorry, who thought it was who they are, and so thought it was part of their own identity. And Christians with gifts, their own identity as Christians with gifts. I think I really struggled to read that. I'm seminary. There were folks with autism, ADHD, who thought it was who they are, and so thought it was part of their own identity as Christians with gifts. That's fair. I mean, that's fine. I mean, it is a part of their own identity because it's part of their day-to-day human experience, and that's fine. Yes, Bible Project is awesome. Unashamed and vulnerable with one another. I also read the false clothes were an acknowledgement of the loss of priestly garments. That's fair. all goes back to love. Honestly, I think if I weren't a Christian, I'd be a super weird kind of hippie-ish. Anyway, yes, so would I. So would I. But yeah, it is about love and trying to understand our. Yes, it is all about loving and trying to understand our neighbors and trying to accommodate for our neighbors so they can exist alongside us. So they can exist and, effectively recreate Eden in some ways. New creation. I talk about that a lot. New creation. It's all about love and the move towards new creation. So I hope you guys had fun. I hope you guys had fun and bless your neurodivergent neighbor and all that. God bless. See you around, folks.